Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Behind the Badge. My name is Jason Ross and I'll be your host for the evening. With me tonight I have two very special guests. I have Sergeant Dennis Smith of the Traffic Bureau and I have Motor Officer Paul Lopez. Tonight's topic is traffic enforcement. It's a hot topic in Glendale. We typically get a good response from the viewers at home and we're hoping to get a lot of calls tonight. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone this is a live call-in show and the phone number is 818-548-3344. We welcome any calls regarding traffic enforcement tonight. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I'd like to introduce the guests, and I'd like you to take a second to tell the people at home a little about yourselves. Sergeant Dennis Smith, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
I was hired by the Glendale Police Department on January 10th, 1980. I worked patrol when I first came on the department. I transferred to the Traffic Bureau as a motor officer in 1981. That was a big goal of mine when I came on the department. My father was a motor officer in the city of Pasadena. My grandfather was a motor officer in the city of Los Angeles. So it was a big goal of mine. I stayed in the Traffic Bureau until 1985, and I transferred to the burglary detail, and I was an investigator there until 1990. At that time, I transferred back to patrol. I remained there until the summer months of 1990. I was transferred to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department as a staff instructor. I stayed there for 2 years. I ultimately came back to patrol, and I was assigned as a field training officer for 2.5 years. I transferred to the robbery homicide unit and was assigned as an investigator from 1994 until 2002 when I was promoted as sergeant. I remained in patrol until my transfer to the Traffic Bureau in November of 2006, and this is where I am now.
It's quite an impressive resume. I'm glad I don't have to go over mine here in your presence, Sarge. Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm Officer Paul Lopez. I do not have half the experience as Sergeant Smith does. I came on with Glendale Police Department in December of 2002. Came out of the academy in May of 2003, where I went into patrol. I spent approximately 2.5 years in the beginning years of my career in patrol, where then I came over to the Traffic Bureau, first as a traffic car, and then graduated the LAPD Motor School approximately 2 years ago. I've been on a motorcycle ever since. This, as Sergeant Smith said, this was also a goal for myself, having grown up in the city of Glendale and seeing the fine motor officers that the city's had in the past. It was a goal of mine to come over to the detail.
Well, folks, the topic tonight is traffic enforcement, and before we really dive into the topic and talk about specifics, Sergeant Smith, I'd like you to give the viewers at home just a brief overview of what the Traffic Bureau entails. I know we have motor officers and traffic investigators and parking checkers, and I think that some of the people at home may not appreciate the vast responsibilities that you guys have. And if you just touch a little bit on each of those areas within the Traffic Bureau and let viewers at home know what they do.
When I worked the Traffic Bureau in 1981 through 1985, the duties of the Traffic Bureau were not anywhere near what it is today. Today, we're responsible for many different things. We get numerous complaints from citizens, people speeding on their street, failing to stop for stop signs, what have you. We also get a lot of calls from schools. That's one of our main complaints. We have officers that are assigned to different schools. They will patrol the area and so forth and ensure that traffic laws are enforced and that it's safe for the children to be in and around the schools. We have a grant right now which is called our Pedestrian Education Speed Enforcement Grant. We had a problem in the city with auto pedestrian collisions, and we applied for a grant from the California Office of Traffic Safety and received a grant last October. The grant is in the amount of $133,000, and it has two different facets to it. One component is pedestrian education component, and we've developed some traffic safety brochures. We continually look at our statistics and find out where most of the auto pedestrian collisions occur, and we have 9 different task forces that we are going to staff by September 30th of this year. The task forces are 5 hours in length. They consist of a sergeant and 5 civilian workers, CSOs we call them, and they go out in the field where the accidents most frequently occur. They disseminate traffic brochures to pedestrians, people that are driving, shop owners, and so forth. And we're hoping we can make an impact on these collisions and reduce them. The other component, the other prong of this grant is speed enforcement. And we have 23 different speed enforcement operations we'll do before September 30th. We look at different areas in the cities where we have speed problems, and we have these task forces which are 6 hours in length. They consist of a sergeant and 6 officers, and I said we're going to do 23 of them by September 30th. There are many other duties that we have. One of them is a show like this. We try to do outreach programs to reach the public and so forth. We have a grant for sobriety enforcement where we staff 10 DUI checkpoints throughout the year. We're also a member of the Avoid the 40 DUI task force, which are 40 agencies within Los Angeles County. We happen to be the director of Region 3. And over the course of the year, we'll do 3 additional checkpoints and 3 saturation patrols. So we do quite a bit of that in the city of Glendale here. As I said, there are many different duties. The complexion of the Traffic Bureau is a lot different than when I worked it before.
I can imagine. Now, Paul, I'll have you here in just a second explain to the viewers at home. You're a motor officer. You ride a motorcycle. And prior to working for the police department, I thought, hey, the guys on the motorcycles were bad news. All they do is hand out tickets. But there's a lot more to it than that. Can you go ahead and tell the viewers at home, maybe show them your kind side that there's more to the job than just riding around on a motorcycle writing tickets? Do you want to tell them a little bit about some of the other things that you handle?
Okay, like Sergeant Smith said, we do go to the schools. We usually go first thing in the morning, about 7:30 in the morning, to the different elementary schools, junior highs, high schools, and then again in the afternoon. One is for traffic enforcement, but it's also an opportunity for us to meet the kids, say hi, turn our lights and siren on for them a little bit, hand out stickers, just so they realize that the officers are not always the bad guys, as sometimes people in the public have a sore spot for police officers that are getting them tickets or bad communication between them in the past. We do that. We pass out, like I said, we pass out the stickers and so the little things like that. I think it's easier for us on the motorcycle. We're more visible than an actual squad car. We're not handling radio calls, so we can take a couple more minutes of our time of our day to talk to the public as opposed to just handling a call saying, I'm sorry, I have another call to go to. Since we don't have that on the motorcycle, we have a little bit more opportunity to speak to people.
And you guys also investigate traffic collisions, typically. That's one of your responsibilities, so the officers that work patrol don't have to. Is that right?
Yes. The way it works is we're, I guess, the quote-unquote specialists in the field. We handle, our main focus is traffic enforcement, i.e. issuing citations or handling the collisions in the city, whether they be a small, what we call PDO, property damage only, or an actual injury report, city property involved, if somebody collides with a light pole or whatnot, or helping people exchange information if it's on private property.
Gotcha. Well, folks, we've got an array of knowledge here brought to the table tonight, and I would hope that some of you would call us up with some questions. We'd like to discuss this with the viewers at home, and we know that traffic is it's an issue sometimes with the citizens of Glendale, and a lot of people have a lot of concerns. We're going to talk about those tonight. We have 2 specialized officers present. Sergeant Smith has been around for quite a while, and Officer Lopez, he's a specialist when it comes to traffic and traffic investigation. So please give us a call. Phone number is 818-548-3344. With any questions you might have, we're going to be talking about vehicle laws tonight. There's a few new ones coming into effect in July. We can answer questions about laws in regards to driving, and anything else traffic related. So please give us a call. We'd love to answer those questions for you. Sergeant Smith, you touched briefly on the problem with automobiles and pedestrians early on in describing the Traffic Bureau responsibilities. Can you tell us a little bit more about where Glendale falls in the state of California, and what is an auto-ped collision, I think, as you called it?
An auto-pedestrian collision is anything involving a vehicle and an actual pedestrian. That could also include somebody on a scooter, or somebody riding a scooter. Somebody in a wheelchair would be considered a pedestrian. And I was surprised to see how many automobile pedestrian collisions we have. When I actually wrote the grant, I looked at our statistics in the California Office of Traffic Safety, and they actually have rankings for the different cities according to population. Our city is ranked with 49 other cities, and when I wrote the grant, we were actually number 2 out of 50, which means that's not good. Number 1 out of 50 is the worst, number 2 is the second worst. We were number 1 in pedestrian collisions involving people over the age of 65. So I wrote this grant. We ended up getting it in October, and the 2006 statistics, actually, we fared a little bit better. We came out number 3 and number 4 based on either population or the amount of vehicle miles that are traveled. So we improved our position from 2 to either 3 or 4. And we're still ranked number 1, I believe it is, 1 out of 50 for automobile pedestrians involving pedestrians over the age of 65. So we're really trying to improve in that area. That's what the pedestrian in education program that we have is all about. And we're hoping that we can get the message out there that, even though you may be crossing in a crosswalk and you have the right-of-way legally and so forth, you have painted lines and lights in the roadway that protect you, you may have the right-of-way, but it's probably better to relinquish that if you see that that driver is not going to stop. And one of the things we say is make eye contact with the driver and make sure they see you and that they are going to stop before you cross.
I remember a while back learning the 3 E's of traffic enforcement, or traffic. There was enforcement, engineering, and education. And I'm sure that the unfortunate statistic of being the worst city in automobile and pedestrian collisions with pedestrians over the age of 65 is something where education is a big part of that. Let's talk a little about the enforcement side of things with Paul here. What are some of the common causes of pedestrian and automobile collisions that you see from an enforcement side? Laws broken, either by the pedestrian or the vehicles, and how to remedy that?
Well, the major issues are usually the pedestrian failing to yield to oncoming vehicles. As the sergeant said, they're not making eye contact. They figure that they're the pedestrian, they have the right of way, they just step right off of a curb, even though they are crossing in a marked crosswalk or crossing in an unmarked crosswalk. They still have the responsibility to yield to an oncoming vehicle if that vehicle is too close. That is a major issue that we have where the pedestrians feel that they just have the right of way because they are the pedestrian. The other one is the drivers failing to yield is complete opposite. The drivers failing to yield to the pedestrians, where they feel the pedestrian isn't, if they're not crossing in a marked crosswalk, they will quote unquote say the person is jaywalking, and there's the failure to yield because of that. We as traffic motor officers, we try to, it's a number 1 priority for us. Based on the statistics we've had with pedestrian involved accidents and speed related accidents, those are our two top priorities. The number 1 thing we can always do is, when we advise people and we give them a citation, be it the pedestrian or the driver, advise them that this is the number 1 city for pedestrian involved accidents and the dangers for both sides and the responsibility of both sides to make sure that they're paying attention and yielding, whether who has the right or whether they're just yielding so there's not the accident.
And the major cause of the automobile pedestrian accidents and looking at the primary collision factors is drivers failing to yield to the pedestrians. If you look at it across the board, that's what the major cause is. However, as Paul said, there are many pedestrians who fail to cross legally, and when you do that, you take your life in your own hands.
Certainly. Well, we've got our first 2 callers of the evening. We'll go ahead and take Trevor on line 1. Trevor, you have a question about pedestrians crossing in the crosswalk?
Yes. When I'm waiting for a pedestrian, does he have to be completely off the street or just out of my lane?
Trevor, that's one of the most common questions we get. Thanks for your call. I still get hit up by relatives from time to time that ask me that question, and you have to kind of explain it because at the heart of that matter is yield, the word yield as far as the law reads. And Paul, do you want to go ahead and address his question? He's asking, how long do you have to wait for a pedestrian in a crosswalk before you can drive through the crosswalk?
The way we look at it is if it becomes a danger to either the driver or the pedestrian. If it's a 4-lane highway, there's a race center medium. For example, on North Brand, there's actually 4 lanes for northbound travel, 2 lanes in southbound. If the pedestrian's on what we would consider the southbound lanes, the west side of the street, and you're traveling northbound, then it's really not an issue because you're not interfering with the pedestrian's right to cross the street. If, for example, he had just passed and you're only 1 lane behind the pedestrian, then that is an issue, because if that pedestrian were to stop for whatever reason, if they have a small child with them, small child goes back, they drop a toy, or the pedestrian drops a toy, then we're going to have a serious collision. Even though the pedestrian has already crossed your lane of traffic, if you're still that close, then it becomes an issue where it is a citable offense.
Sounds like what I'm hearing. If there's no conflict between the vehicle and the pedestrian crossing, and they're a safe distance away, then it should be safe to proceed through the crosswalk. Always make sure, though, that there's no potential for conflict there. They may walk past your vehicle and you've got a couple feet to spare, but as Paul said, a pedestrian can stop walking, suddenly turn around because they hear something, whatever. So you want to make sure you play it safe, but there's no need to wait for them to make it all the way across a very wide street before you proceed, just as long as there's no conflict. We've got another question, or another caller, Gia. It sounds like Gia's got the same question. Gia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. So I just want to make it clear. For example, if I'm driving and there's a pedestrian on the left side of me who's going to cross the street going to my right, and I'm supposed to turn right, and should I wait for that pedestrian? I know, the other way around. So it's the pedestrian going to the left side. So am I supposed to wait for the pedestrian to reach the other side of the street before I turn right? Or can I turn right when he's halfway to the other side?
Gia, thanks for your call. It sounds like the same question is being asked, and I think we can answer that one fairly quickly. As long as they're a safe distance away from your vehicle, and there's no conflict between your car and the pedestrian crossing, and it's safe to proceed, then you can proceed through the crosswalk, and it wouldn't be viewed as not yielding to them. Do you guys agree with me on that one?
Yes, I do. In addition to that, I've seen people that do yield the right-of-way, just like Gia said, and I don't have any problem with that. I applaud them for being very safe and cautious. But you're right. I mean, if there's no conflict there, then they can go ahead and make the right turn.
Certainly. I think as police officers out there, we always appreciate seeing the motorists that wait the extra second, that make sure there's no conflict, because it's just playing it on the safe side. No one wants to hit a pedestrian on the way to work, and by the same token, you don't want a ticket from a police officer because you cut it too close or you were running late and decided you didn't want to wait for the pedestrian. Folks, it looks like we're starting to get some callers in regards to pedestrian safety. We're going to be talking about a lot of subjects tonight. Call up with any questions you might have in regards to traffic enforcement, laws. There's quite a bit of things we're going to be discussing. The phone number again is 818-548-3344. Please give us a call. Sergeant Smith, let's go ahead and talk about speed enforcement. You talked briefly about that, the special grants. Speed is one of those things I think that tends to be one of the common complaints that we get from the citizens of Glendale. The people are driving too fast on my street. There's racing going on at all hours of the night. Can you talk a little bit about what the Glendale Police Department is doing to address that issue?
Sure. One of the complaints that we used to get in patrol quite regularly was the speed on West Glen Oaks. I mean, everybody that lives in that area knows that there was a problem over there. We continue to have our task forces that I'd mentioned before will target Glen Oaks as well as several other streets. I know that Verdugo Road is one where they speed quite regularly. Kenyatta is one where speed is a factor. And there's several streets throughout the city. I get numerous calls from citizens on other streets that call as well that they have a speed problem there as well. And what we did with this pedestrian safety speed enforcement grant is we were able to purchase 5 new LiDAR or laser devices which measure speed. And they're very accurate. It's a lot different than radar. It's pinpointed accuracy from a distance of, I believe it's 1,000 feet. I think the width is about 3 feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the farthest I've actually shot somebody where got a lock on their speed was 1,800 feet.
So this is an extremely accurate device. You can point it right at the center of the car at the license plate, and you know which target you're acquiring. Prior to doing that, you'll estimate the person's speed, and after you do this for a while, you get pretty good at it. And one of the things we do in these speed enforcement operations is we try to make an impact and try to lower the speed. When they see officers out there issuing citations and so forth, then they lower their speed. So that's the one thing that we try to do. We look at our collisions and find out where most of the speed-related collisions are happening, and then we tailor our enforcement operations accordingly.
Now, besides speed being a complaint from the citizens calling you and asking for extra patrol, or do you find that it's a contributing factor in some of the collisions in Glendale as well?
Absolutely. The speed is definitely a factor in many collisions.
And can you explain to the viewers at home how going 50 miles an hour is much less safe than going 40 miles an hour on some of the streets in Glendale, like Glen Oaks, or 30 in a school zone instead of 25, and maybe what gets taken into account when speed limits are set?
Well, your ability to react when you're going at a faster speed is diminished. And if you're traveling at 50 miles an hour and the speed limit is 25, your ability, as I said, your ability to react is very, very is bad. There may be parked cars, there may be pedestrians on the street, a child could run out chasing a ball or something like that. There could be somebody turning in front of you. There's many times where, as a motor officer, I'm extra cautious because I kind of anticipate that somebody may turn in front of me or do something that causes me to brake sharply or turn to avoid a collision. And I've had that happen numerous times. If you're going at a fast speed, your ability to do that, to avoid an accident, is greatly diminished.
Paul, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, roughly, it's some people consider it, okay, well, if I'm driving, for example, 35 miles an hour as opposed to 40 miles an hour, that you have 5 extra feet. Some people just will equivalate however many different mile per hour per feet they need for the stopping distance. It's quite the opposite. For every mile per hour, that braking distance just keeps multiplying and multiplying. We, as traffic officers, have been to schools. We have the mathematical equation figured out. It takes into total reaction time, braking time, and the braking distance. For example, if you're going 35 miles an hour, it's going to take you roughly 135 feet to bring your vehicle to a safe and complete stop. Where if you're traveling 40 miles an hour, just 5 miles an hour more, you're going to be traveling at roughly 164 feet prior to bringing that vehicle to a stop. So that causes everything. When we look at traffic collisions, everything involved usually has to do with speed. I mean, you could have a minor fender bender where a vehicle just bumps a car from behind at a couple miles an hour, and the person says, well, I wasn't speeding, officer. Well, you actually were speeding, because if you were driving 0, then you wouldn't have collided with that vehicle. So we look at it, and it's just those couple extra feet, those couple extra miles per hour. If you slow those speeds down, if a ball comes out in the street, a little kid comes running out in the street, it gives you that much more time to perceive the danger and bring your vehicle to a safe and complete stop.
You made some really good points there. The distance that you travel, at a higher speed is going to be much greater, and people don't tend to realize that, hey, my vehicle will stop in this distance if I'm going this speed. But, when you actually see it marked out, and I've been to many collision scenes where you see the skid marks for, 180 feet, you realize how far it takes a large vehicle to stop. Let's talk a little bit about the tools. You mentioned the LiDAR and the radar. Let's talk a little bit about the tools that you guys use. The motorcycles. Why motorcycles?
It's more beneficial to us when, like on a rain day, when we end up going back into a patrol car, or if we have a ride along with us where we end up back in a patrol car, it's more difficult for us to get through traffic. Although in one way it's safer because we have all the metal around us, it's just a little bit more of a hindrance, especially when we're working up and around the schools in the morning and the afternoon. In a car, you're just stuck like everybody else. On a motorcycle, it's a little bit easier for us to circumvent traffic so we can go after the violators. So that's why the motorcycle makes it a little bit easier. It also makes it easier for us to park in an area that's safe for us as officers and also safe for the public, so that we can go out and work special enforcement in specific areas where speed is an issue.
Gotcha. Well, folks, I'd like to remind everyone at home that this is a live call-in show. waiting for callers to call us up and ask us some questions about traffic enforcement tonight. The phone number is 818-548-3344. We're going to take a short break here and show a video on traffic enforcement. We hope to take some calls as soon as we come back.
Okay, red car number 1.
Right now, the Glendale Police Department Traffic Bureau consists of 14 motors, 1 traffic car, 2 investigators, 2 sergeants, a lieutenant, and 1 captain.
Hi, how are you doing today? Good. Do you know what the speed limit is here on Glen Oaks? Yeah, do you know how fast you're going? You're going 53. I locked you on my laser at 53 miles an hour.
Our primary function is traffic enforcement and the safety of drivers and pedestrians throughout our city. We do work off of complaints and heavy traffic areas in the city of Glendale.
You were passing the cars in the number 2 and number 3 lane. I visually estimated your speed, then I locked it on my laser at 53 miles per hour. The speed limit's 40, so you're about 13 over. And you just got to drive a little slower. Pay more attention to your speed. Drive safely, ma'am.
We have certain areas that we try to tackle the speed enforcement. We have a lot of speed problems in our city. That comes from complaints that we get from people, numerous calls for service. We have a motor officer over here working speed. We're on Kenyatta right now at Del Val. The speed limit here is 35 miles an hour. He's conducting a traffic stop right now. We're going to see what he got his speed at. Officer Ryan stopped a violator that was speeding. He was doing 48 miles an hour in a 35 mile per hour zone. He got the violator driving southbound Kenyatta from Del Val. We actually have a huge problem right now with speeding on Kenyatta. It's primarily a residential zone. We have a lot of pedestrians walking up and down the street, a lot of driveways, a lot of cars parallel parked against the curb. We have a park right up the street. It's just a very busy roadway. We're trying to get the speed issues under control. The motorcyclist was driving southbound Kenyatta, and he got his speed at 51 miles an hour. I would visually probably put him at 60 to 65 miles an hour as he was coming down, and it was obvious that, and very apparent that he saw my partner just parked right against the curb and immediately slowed down. I heard the engine decelerate very quickly, so he's actually getting a big break from probably 60, 65 to 51 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone, so it's way too fast. Our traffic collisions, 2006 versus 2007, they have decreased. In 2006, our injury traffic collisions, we've had about 658. In 2006, 2007, we've had 554. They've declined, which is a good sign.
We were set up on the intersection of Everett and Elk, which is a 4-way stop sign. We were parked east the intersection, monitoring all 4 stops. When we noticed this black Camry coming at us at a high rate of speed, I would estimate his speed visually at over 40 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour residential area. I didn't think he was going to stop at the stop sign when he was approaching. There was a car southbound. This gentleman turned directly behind that car going through the intersection at about, I would say, roughly 15 to 20 miles an hour estimate. Pulled in behind him, noticed he wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and upon contact I realized it was a male that I had given a ticket to yesterday afternoon about the same time as right now.
You're going to Glendale High? Glendale High's over there. I wrote you a ticket yesterday, didn't I? Did I write you a ticket? Didn't I thought you looked familiar. It's the same car. I wrote you a ticket yesterday. What did I write you a ticket for yesterday? Seatbelt. Oh my gosh, you're not wearing your seatbelt again.
He said he was in a hurry to go to the high school to pick up his daughter, which is in the other direction that he's going and traveling right now. So he's going to be issued a citation for running a stop sign and failure to wear a seatbelt for the second day in a row.
A lot of times when we get behind someone and they're not wearing their seatbelt, you can see the seatbelt buckle straight up and down against the doorpost. You can see the seatbelt buckle itself dangling in the up position. And normally, as soon as we get behind someone, they'll see us and put their seatbelt on or scratch or put their head to the doorpost, try to hide the strap if they're not wearing it, make it look like they're wearing it. Okay, right there. Here's a mother and 2 kids. Both kids are seatbelted, and you'll notice that she's not seatbelted. She's right in this truck right here, and you'll see that she's not wearing her seatbelt. Okay, so you can see both straps straight up and down. She's just reaching for her seatbelt right now to put it on. Did you see that? She just put her seatbelt on right now. I responded to an accident one time. Right here.
Yeah.
Was the head of the driver.
Okay.
So, needless to say, that was a long report. It didn't have to be if they were wearing their seatbelt. Hi, guys. Unfortunately, we pull people over, and
I know, but I've never been
repeatedly, though,
I know, but I've
for
never
the
been
same
pulled over,
violation.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
So a warning to the- that's life.
Okay. Please drive safely, okay, and wear your seatbelt. Right now, we currently have 3 red light camera intersections set up. We have Glendale, Broadway, Colorado Pacific, and Mountain Verdugo. Shortly, we're going to be having San Fernando Los Feliz. They target intersections with the most traffic collisions and congestion. If a person is driving their vehicle in a certain direction where the cameras are set up and they fail to stop behind a limit line when the light turns red, a series of photos and flashes will go off, which captures a picture of the driver, the front of the vehicle, and the rear of the vehicle. So we have both license plates, what the driver looks like, description of the car, and so forth. And then they'll get a citation in the mail, and they'll have to take care of it that way. We're in the top 10 in the entire country for our pedestrians being struck by vehicles. In 2006 and 2007, we've had 126 pedestrians hit each year. It happened to be the same amount. A lot of times people will cross the street against a don't walk sign or against a red light. People will just, if they see a green light and a steady don't walk hand, they'll just start walking across the street. If the person is elderly and they get halfway across the street or not even halfway across the street, now they're walking against a red light and the opposite direction has a green light. It can be very dangerous for that person crossing the street. In our business districts, we'll have people park on one side of the street. Their destination is directly across the street. They will get out of their car and walk across the street and not think twice about it.
You got to be careful crossing the street like this. It's very dangerous. Let me see your ID. We get a lot of pedestrians that get run over. All right, and don't cross the street outside of a crosswalk anymore. Use a crosswalk.
Walking right across there. We're going to go talk to him.
What happened?
Actually, why I'm stopping you is because you crossed right here.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah, we have a crosswalk right here, sir, and right here.
I'm sorry.
We even have lights for the pedestrians. We're trying to convey a message where our pedestrians need to use crosswalks and not cross mid-block or outside of a crosswalk because they will be issued a citation. Please drive safely, okay?
I will. Thank you very much.
All right. Walk safely, too, huh? Thanks.
45.
Part of traffic safety and pedestrian enforcement is issuing citations and educating people. People often complain that they weren't going that speed, that they didn't mean to do a certain violation, that they didn't know about a certain violation. You know, an easy way not to get a ticket is just go the speed limit, follow the rules of the road. If you're running late, just try to wake up earlier the next day or try to leave a little bit earlier so you don't need to speed, you don't need to rush, and just get to your destination point safely. It might save your life, passengers, or other people.
Welcome back, folks. Tonight we're talking about traffic enforcement. I'd like to remind everyone at home this is a live call-in show. Please give us a call with any questions you might have in regards to traffic enforcement. The phone number is 818-548-3344. We have a call on hold. Joyce has been waiting for a couple of minutes. Joyce, are you there?
Hello?
Hello, Joyce. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can see you, too.
Outstanding.
Well, my question was partially answered in that segment, but I wanted to know the officers ticket people for jaywalking, which I guess they do, and what the fine is?
Okay, I'll have Paul Lopez handle that call or that question here in just a second. Thank you for calling, Joyce, and thanks for waiting. We appreciate your call. Joyce is asking, do we write jaywalking tickets and what the fine is? Do you happen to know those answers, Paul?
Actually, the fine, I'm not 100% sure on. I believe the last penalty that I went to court on was roughly about $150. That comes down from the court. It's not up to the officer or the police department. We are out there writing jaywalking tickets vigorously. As we've said before in the past, it's not just the motorist that causes the collisions. A lot of times it is the pedestrian. For those that don't know, some people think jaywalking is just any violation of a pedestrian. It is actually a pedestrian crossing between two fixed and controlled intersections. For example, on North Brand, which was shown in that clip, between Brand and Stalker and Brand and Dryden, if somebody were to cross the street anywhere in that area outside of a marked crosswalk, it would be considered jaywalking. And like I said, we are out there writing those citations because the drivers aren't really expecting somebody to come shooting out from between parked cars and dart across the street outside of a marked crosswalk when there's areas with the marked crosswalks.
Gotcha. Well, Joyce, I hope that answered your question. We're going to take another call here from Andy. Andy, are you there?
Hello, hi.
How's it going?
I'm doing good. And you?
Fantastic. You have a question tonight about crossing in a crosswalk?
Yes. If there's a pedestrian crossing the crosswalk, and they're almost finished crossing the street, but they're on the other lane, would I still get a ticket if I pass the crosswalk?
I understand what your question is, Andy, and thanks for calling in with that one. I think we're hearing the same theme that we heard earlier. If a pedestrian's crossing the street, do you have to wait for them to make it all the way across? Paul, we came to a consensus earlier, I think.
Once again, it comes back to as long as you're not interfering with that pedestrian's travel. If they're 30, 40 feet away from you going in an opposite direction, yes, it is safe for you to pass behind them. If they're 2 or 3 feet away from you, then obviously as a motorist, you need to yield the right of way and make sure the pedestrian's actually left where there's no inherent danger of them crossing and stopping and you passing in front of or behind them.
Andy, I hope that answered your question. Just so long as it's safe for you to do so and there's no conflict there with the interests of the pedestrian and where they're crossing, it should be fine for you to it should be fine for you to proceed. Just make sure you do it in a safe manner and at a safe speed, and I think you'll be just fine. We've got another call here from Mark. Mark, you've got a call about photo enforcement?
Yeah, the photo enforced intersections. When you're making a left turn and you're waiting for the light to turn yellow, how many cars are allowed to pass before a photo is taken of the vehicle?
Okay, Mark, that's a really good question here, and it kind of addresses two issues. How photo enforcement works, and I'll let you handle that in just a second, Sergeant Smith. What triggers the camera to go off, things of that nature. And secondly, what I'm hearing there, and I recently had an issue with this when I was driving through Glendale, is when a light turns yellow and you're waiting to turn left, what do you do? How long do you sit there? How many cars get to go through the intersection? And I'll have Paul handle the second part of that. But Sergeant Smith, can you tell us a little bit about how red light cameras work?
Yes, we have. We're going to have 5 approaches within the city of Glendale. There's a company called Redflex that is our vendor that has installed already. They've installed 3 of these approaches within the city. There's one installed at Verdugo Mountain, another one's installed at Colorado Pacific, and there's another one at Glendale and Broadway. What happens is they install the camera, which has several different cameras within a box, and these take photos of the vehicle from behind. On the opposite side of the intersection, they also have a face camera, which will take a picture of the driver's face. In addition to that, there's a video camera that records the person as they're passing through the intersection and so forth. Now, there's loops that are cut into the roadway, and when the vehicle travels over the loop, well, let me take that back. Once the light changes to red and a vehicle travels over the 2 loops, it will trigger the camera if they're going at a certain speed. And what that'll do is it'll activate the camera. They'll take a face shot. They'll take a shot from behind the vehicle. They'll take a video of the vehicle and so forth. And then that data is transferred back to the company, which is located in Scottsdale, Arizona. It will be transmitted over the internet from that signal. And then there's people at Redflex that actually look at the violation, ensure that there is a violation. They'll actually look at the light, ensure that it is red. They'll see that the car is behind the limit line or crosswalk. They'll run DMV information and find out, where the car is registered and so forth. And then there's a quality control. They'll actually look at, there's about 3 different people that actually look at it. And then ultimately, when they determine that that is a good violation, they will transfer it to the Glendale Police Department, and we'll look at it. We will do another quality control check. We will ensure that there is actually a red light violation, that we can recognize the driver's face, and then it will accept it or deny it. And if it is accepted, then the violator will be mailed a citation in the mail.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is there's a lot of precautions in place to make sure that if you're sitting in an intersection, light turns yellow, you're waiting to turn left, and you proceed to make your left turn. There's plenty of precautions in place to make sure that you're not wrongly sent a citation for running a red light when you in fact entered on a green or a yellow light. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct. For the system to activate, the light has to be red, and the person has to travel over the 2 loops at a known speed. If those things aren't present, then it's not going to take a picture, won't capture them.
Okay. Blake is on hold. Blake, do you have a question about crossing at unmarked intersections?
Hello?
Yeah. Blake, are you there?
Yeah, how you doing?
Good. How's it going? You got a question about crossing at unmarked intersections?
Yeah, what's the rules on, can you not walk across alley intersections and intersections where it's not painted? You can legally do that, can't you?
Yeah, in general, yes, and that's a good question. I appreciate you waiting for us, Blake. Paul, why don't you handle that? What is an unmarked intersection, and where can pedestrians cross? I know he mentioned an intersection of an alley and a street, but can you talk a little bit about unmarked crosswalks at unmarked intersections?
Unmarked crosswalks are exactly that. They're just not painted. They are anywhere where you have 2 streets that intersect each other, it is considered an intersection, whether it be marked with the painted double white lines for the actual crosswalk, the flashing lights that you see up on Brand Boulevard or whatnot. That would be considered a marked crosswalk. It's legal for a pedestrian to cross there. If it's an intersection where there's 2 streets that intersect, but there is not actual paint on the roadway, it is still an intersection. It's still legal for the pedestrian to cross there. Once again, the pedestrian has to yield the right-of-way to any vehicles approaching that would be an inherent danger to them. Once the pedestrians actually started crossing the street, then it becomes the responsibility of the motorist to then yield the right-of-way to the pedestrian that's crossing.
Now, in addition to that, the alleys he asked about. An alley is considered an intersection. However, pedestrians are not; those are not unmarked crosswalks. A pedestrian cannot cross at an alley.
Okay. George is on hold. George, you have a question about cell phones while driving?
Yeah, I see. I was born raised in Glendale, so but with the ring of the attack to where the cat, ring get taken for the on cell phone, and
I'm sorry,
ring unfortunate.
George, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Could you speak up just a tiny bit?
Yeah, sorry, I had a heart attack, okay. The thing is, are they really going to force the cell phone? And if they're really going to do it? And so the question I'm asking.
Okay. Thanks for the call, George. I know that cell phones while driving is a huge concern. And I'll bet dollars to donuts that there's going to be quite a few tickets written once that law goes into effect. Paul, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, there is the law that's going to come into effect on July 1st of 2008 that prohibits all motorists from using any handheld cellular device. At this point, we actually can issue citations if the officer feels that the person's on the cell phone, they're text messaging. Obviously, a safe speed for somebody to be text messaging and driving their vehicles 0. They can't control and look down as they're texting, and control their vehicle at the same time. However, with the new law coming into effect in 2008, or excuse me, July 1st, 2008, it prohibits all motorists from using any handheld device. You will be able to use a Bluetooth device or something, the speaker option on your phone where the phone is actually not in your hand. Those laws will be different for those under 18 who those under 18 will not be able to use a phone at all. This new law does not affect the passengers in the vehicle, obviously, because they don't maintain control over the vehicle. The officers out in the field, not just in the city of Glendale, but statewide, I would venture to say will be out enforcing this violation, just as we did when the seatbelt laws came into effect in the state.
I hope we answered that question about cell phone usage and hands-free kits. I want to talk just a little bit more about that because the state has been tracking that for a few years now, I guess, with collision reports. Is that true, Paul?
Yes. When we come up onto collision scenes, one of the questions an officer will always ask the drivers is if they were using their cell phone. I've actually only had one collision in 5.5 years where somebody was honest enough to say that yes, they were on a phone. Right now, like Officer Ross said, we're just collecting data. The CHP and the state are just collecting data, and that's what we've used to compile to create this new law. At this point, it's not a violation. It's not something that somebody would be cited for if somebody was talking on the phone while they were involved in an accident. It just helps the officers know if the person was actually had their main focus was on the roadway while they were driving.
Folks, we're getting some really good questions. I hope you'll keep calling. So far, they've been relatively easy, but we have Sergeant Smith here in case we get stumped. Sarge, I'm going to have you talk about the SKIDS program now before we get any other calls. This is a program that has to do with teaching students about impaired driving?
Yes. It stands for Students Knowledge Impaired Driving Simulation. And what the program does is we try to target younger drivers. The Star Ford donated an electric car to the program. What we'll do is we'll lay out a maze of cones, and then we'll allow the participants to actually drive through the maze of cones. They're very narrow in width, and it's hard to negotiate your turns with that electric car. But usually the first time out, the drivers do pretty well. And then they're turned around in a circle, their eyes are closed, and they put on a pair of goggles that impairs their vision, and it simulates somebody driving under the influence. They then try to negotiate the maze of cones, and sometimes it's quite comical. They'll run over the cones and so forth, and you can really see the hazards of driving while impaired. And we go out to the schools, we'll have the students participate, and usually it's a big hit.
So you get pretty good feedback from the students involved, and do you think it opens their eyes just a bit as to what it would be like to drive impaired and how much it would affect them?
I think it does. I think it's a real eye-opener. You can see that your ability to drive is definitely weakened, and I think that it really hits home with them.
I think that's great, especially coupled with the every 15 minutes program that we've talked about a few times on here. Teaching the youth all about driving and the responsibilities. I hope they're at home watching now, paying attention to some of the laws, because a lot of times you get traffic collisions and citations that are caused by not understanding things. We'll talk a little bit about wireless hands-free kits again, Paul. But we have Hank on hold. He's been here holding for a couple minutes. Hank, do you have a question about officers using their lights?
Yes, I do. Especially at nighttime, do their lights have to be on the motorcycle, their headlights, or do they have to have their blinking lights on to show that they pull somebody over? And also in the daytime, but more referring to nighttime.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the question, Hank. Before I let Sergeant Smith handle this one, when it comes to lighting to the rear of the vehicle, and I'm glad you mentioned this, I recently had an experience on the freeway where an officer had pulled over someone who had committed some type of violation, and a highway patrol officer asked the officer to diminish the lights flashing to the rear because it would affect traffic, and there's also beliefs that people who are driving under the influence drive where they look, and if they're looking at your flashing lights, they may drift in your direction. And I had never heard that, but apparently it's the practice of some agencies to alter the lighting behind their vehicle after they've made a traffic stop. I don't know if our officers engage in anything like that, but Sergeant Smith, I'm sure you could address using the lights to the front of the vehicle to pull people over.
That was my practice. When I came on the department, that was what I was trained, is that people do focus on the lights, the revolving lights and so forth. And after I made a traffic stop in a car, I would diminish those lights to where you just had the hazard lights to the rear, the amber lights to the rear. And that was the way I was trained. The motorcycles, you don't have a lot of protection on those motorcycles. We do have strobe lights on those, and generally speaking, we will leave those strobe lights on because we want to make ourselves visible, even though there is that danger where a drunk driver could focus on it and possibly crash into the rear of it. But the ability to be seen is very, very important on a motorcycle. So we do activate our lights, and Paul, do you leave your lights on after a traffic stop?
Actually, yes. Being on a motorcycle, having been trained in the school at LAPD, they've actually had officers, one in which that was hit and killed where they believed it was a daytime, that he was not visible enough. So they actually have a little light on the dashboard of their motorcycles to let the officers know that their high beams are actually not on. LAPD's practice is they ride with their high beams on at all times. Having gone through the school, listening to their instruction and their school of thought of how much, like Sergeant Smith said, we don't have a lot of protection. We're not very visible being on that motorcycle. Anything I can do to make myself that much more visible to the public so that I don't turn in front of them or they don't turn in front of me is just beneficial to everybody involved. I use my high beam at all times throughout the day and throughout the night. When I do a traffic stop on a vehicle, once I stop the vehicle and dismount my motorcycle, I'll turn the front lights off but leave my rear lights on so vehicles can't come up from behind and either hit me, my motorcycle, or the vehicle that I stopped.
Thank you for that question. Denise is on hold with a question about crossing at a freeway entrance. Denise, are you there?
Yes, yeah, I'm here. From Glendale Avenue going up the hill up mountain to get onto the two going east, there's a traffic light. And in the morning there's quite a line of traffic going east. So with the traffic light, it's not a long light, so not many cars can go through on the green. So I'm forever being honked because I won't go if it stops. You know, if it goes to amber and then red, I'll stop and wait for it to go green. But I'm always being honked because I won't move because there's lights there. I mean, they're taking pictures all the time. You see it flashing, but people will just go into the next lane and go round me and honk me at the same time.
Now, are you talking about you're driving a vehicle when this is happening?
Well, I'm stopped at the light waiting for it to turn green so I can get onto the freeway, but there are many people behind me honking me because I won't turn right automatic, because it's not an automatic turn unless the light is green.
Okay. I appreciate your call, Denise, and I understand your question a little bit better now. Turning right at a red light, I think, is what she's talking about here. Getting on the freeway there, if you have a red light that you're stopped at and you intend to turn right, can you do so? Paul, do you want to go ahead and handle this one?
Yes. There's always the signs that will prohibit. You have to be aware of those signs. You'll see them, no right turn on red. And it's usually with specific times when getting on and off a freeway. I know there's some on North Brand when you get on the freeway at the 134, coming northbound to get on the eastbound 134, or coming southbound to make a right onto Good. There are also signs that say no right turn, and they're specific at the times. If I understood the caller's description, I believe she meant Glendale and south of Monterey, where it's actually an offset intersection from the on-ramp and Glendale. At that time, no, you would not be able to make a right turn because it's not a direct right turn. It's approximately, I'd say, about 30 feet north of that limit line as you're going northbound on Glendale to get onto the eastbound 134. So you would not be able to, like she said, you would have to wait. Anybody that passed would be essentially running a red light.
Denise, I hope that helped you out with your question. If you have any other questions or we didn't quite clarify that, I think we were a little unsure of what you were asking, feel free to give our traffic bureau a call. The phone number is 818-548-3130. feel free to give them a call during business hours, and any of the officers that work in the Traffic Bureau would be happy to help you out with that. We have time for at least one more call. Carol on line 2. Carol, you have a question about pedestrians in a crosswalk?
Yes. We had an incident that was in the Glendale News Press about somebody who was a pedestrian was crossing in front of them, and they waited until the pedestrian had passed them, and then they took their right turn. They did not wait until the pedestrian had crossed the entire street, and they were cited for this incident. And most of us driving, when the pedestrian crosses in front of you and they are and they're proceeding to your left, go ahead and make your right turn. This person got a ticket. They asked Randy Adams what his position was. He never responded. And as a resident of Glendale, when I go down Glendale or Verdugo or Brand or Central, once they pass me, I proceed ahead with my right turn. So what is the answer here? Because this person got a ticket, which is a moving violation. So I'd like your response.
Sure, Carol. That's a really good question. I appreciate your concern. If my understanding is correct, this was a letter written into the Glendale News Press
That's
of
correct.
Someone. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and address that in just a second. As we discussed tonight, if there's no conflict between the vehicle and the pedestrian, it's okay to proceed. This wouldn't be the first time that someone received a citation and they recall the facts a little bit different. They don't see it from the officer's point of view, or maybe they don't see the next pedestrian who was unable to step off the curb to proceed because they weren't paying attention, and that created the conflict. I would encourage you to use discretion in driving through Glendale when there's pedestrians crossing in a crosswalk. As long as you let them get a safe distance away, you should be just fine with proceeding.
Well, of course, I suppose you cannot speak for the police chief, but don't you think you should have clarified that in the news press, since it was brought up in the news press? And we all do that. Some of our streets are like Brand Boulevard. My God, you'd have to wait practically a minute before the person got to the other side before you could make a turn, which is just doing nothing but impacting the movement of vehicles.
Sure. I understand your concern, Carol. And I'm glad you brought it to this forum so that we can address it. As long as you use precaution when you're driving, you make sure that there's a safe distance between you and the pedestrian, you should be just fine. And if you do receive a citation, I'm assuming you haven't yet for doing the exact thing you prescribed. If you do receive a citation, there is traffic court where an unbiased party gets to hear the statements from both sides, and he gets to decide if the citation was merited or not. There's always options there for people who receive citations who don't agree with the fact that they got a citation. These two gentlemen, it's their business to enforce traffic laws, and if they say it's okay to do so, as long as it's safe, you should be in pretty good shape. I don't think we have any time for any more callers. Sergeant Smith, did you have any closing statements you'd like to make tonight to the viewers at home?
I think what I'd like to convey is that our auto pedestrian collisions have to reduce. We are trying everything we can to try to reduce them. We have this grant in place, and we're trying to do outreach programs. I would urge the citizens of Glendale to just drive very safely in the city. When you see a pedestrian, use extra caution. And if you are a pedestrian, always remember that even though you have those painted lines, you may have lights in the roadway, use extra caution. Look at the drivers, make sure you make eye contact, and make sure they're going to stop for you.
Paul, any final thoughts?
Just to touch on what Sergeant Smith said, in the city, having grown up, I spent the first 25 years of my life here. It's a lot more congested, especially now we have the new Americana going in. Speeds continue to be an issue when it comes to accidents in the city. The more people we get here, speed just becomes more of an issue. It also becomes an issue with the pedestrians. It's just speed, pedestrians, cell phones, the three do not mix very well at all.
Well, folks, that'll do it for us here tonight. Thank you for tuning in, and we thank you for all of those who took the time to call in and ask us questions. We'll see you next time.